The Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which occurred on April 26, 1986, had a profound and lasting impact on Soviet politics. This tragic event not only exposed the inherent dangers of the Soviet nuclear program, but also revealed the inadequacies and failures of the government's response. The subsequent handling of the crisis and its aftermath significantly influenced the trajectory of Soviet politics and ultimately played a role in the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The incident led to a breakdown in trust between the Soviet government and its citizens, as the severity of the disaster was initially downplayed, resulting in widespread public mistrust. Additionally, the mishandling of the disaster brought to light the inefficiency and lack of transparency within the Soviet bureaucratic system, causing further disillusionment among the populace. The Chernobyl disaster also amplified pre-existing political and economic issues, exacerbating the mounting pressure for reform and ultimately contributing to the unraveling of the Soviet Union. The Chernobyl disaster and Soviet politics. The Chernobyl disaster was a pivotal moment in Soviet history as it exposed the weaknesses of the Soviet system and its governance. The failure to properly manage the construction and operation of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant underscored the lack of transparency and accountability within the Soviet government. The initial attempts to conceal the severity of the accident demonstrated the regime's prioritization of maintaining an illusion of infallibility over the safety and well-being of its citizens. This blatant disregard for truth and public safety eroded the trust and confidence of the Soviet people in their government. Furthermore, the long-term impact of the disaster on Soviet politics cannot be understated. The subsequent cover-up and the reluctance to seek international assistance not only highlighted the political isolation of the Soviet Union, but also intensified domestic skepticism toward the government. This deepened the public's dissatisfaction with the state and played a significant role in shaping the political discontent that ultimately led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. International fallout and political fallout. The international response to the Chernobyl disaster further exacerbated the political consequences for the Soviet Union. The Soviet government's reluctance to timely disclose the extent of the catastrophe resulted in widespread distrust and condemnation from the international community. This damaged the Soviet Union's standing in global politics and weakened its diplomatic influence. The broader implications of the disaster also highlighted the stark contrast between the Soviet government's portrayal of itself as a formidable superpower and the harsh realities of its ineptitude in addressing the crisis. Furthermore, the mishandling of the disaster aggravated tensions between the Soviet Union and Western nations, leading to increased political isolation. The reluctance to seek international assistance as the disaster unfolded further emphasized the regime's dedication to preserving its image of invincibility at the expense of public safety and international cooperation. Consequently, the Chernobyl disaster deepened the existing skepticism toward the Soviet government and intensified the domestic dissatisfaction that would eventually contribute to the unraveling of the Soviet Union. Impact on perestroika and glasnost. The aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster played a significant role in the implementation of reforms such as perestroika and glasnost by Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. The inadequacies revealed by the Chernobyl incident contributed to Gorbachev's recognition of the urgent need for structural and political reforms within the Soviet system. The disaster served as a catalyst for increased openness and transparency, as Gorbachev sought to address the deep-seated issues that had been laid bare by the Chernobyl tragedy. This led to a gradual but irreversible shift in Soviet politics, as the government began to acknowledge and address its failings in governance and decision-making. The disaster also highlighted the environmental and safety concerns associated with the Soviet Union's nuclear program, leading to a heightened sense of urgency in addressing these issues. This public awareness and Gorbachev's response to it ultimately paved the way for increased democratization and liberalization, allowing for greater political freedom and fostering a more open and accountable government. These reforms, spurred by the Chernobyl disaster, marked a significant departure from the traditionally closed and secretive nature of Soviet governance. Conclusion. In conclusion, the Chernobyl disaster had a shocking and transformative effect on Soviet politics. It laid bare the flaws and vulnerabilities of the Soviet government, both domestically and on the world stage. The disaster's aftermath ultimately contributed to the erosion of the Soviet regime's authority and credibility, paving the way for significant political reforms and ultimately hastening the unraveling of the Soviet Union. The mishandling of the disaster and the subsequent unearthing of government inadequacies deepened public mistrust and disillusionment. This pivotal event also amplified the mounting pressure for reform within the Soviet Union and brought to light the urgent need for structural and political changes. The Chernobyl disaster played a crucial role in the implementation of reforms such as perestroika and glasnost by Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. The unprecedented scale of the disaster highlighted the environmental and safety concerns associated with the Soviet Union's nuclear program and underscored the need for increased openness and transparency. This public awareness ultimately paved the way for increased democratization and liberalization, allowing for greater political freedom and fostering a more open and accountable government.